Hi guys, welcome back to the Spurred On podcast. It's Tuesday after a mauling at Craven Cottage on Saturday afternoon, 3-0 at Fulham in a game where we got what we deserved. Absolutely nothing. Jo Dudderidge, musician extraordinaire, is here to talk to me about it. Joe, how are you feeling?
Um, well, deflated, but I'm just trying to be realistic. But I think the long and short of it is that Fulham, they did a number on us. They did their research. They saw where our potential weaknesses were, and we just weren't up to it. On Saturday night, it was a big shame after so much hype after the Villa game, and you can't help but feel that the half the team are already thinking about not getting injured or something. The levels just weren't there, and
Because of
yeah,
the international
that
break? Do you mean because of the international break?
yeah, I do actually. That was my instinct, but they're professionals, and even if that's a subconscious thing, I just don't think they were quite there, and it was very frustrating, very frustrating.
You talked about Fulham doing a number on us. What was really clear to me, especially having kind of watched it back a little bit, is how often during the game we were overloaded down the sides. And obviously, that is something that has been happening to us all season a little bit. Obviously, the Premier League is a harsh league, good coaching. They know that that's where the gaps are. But certainly in this game, it seemed to me not just kind of we were doubly overloaded, but almost like there were two or three Fulham players at times. A central midfielder, Pereira, would also go out wide to help as well. And all
Mm.
of those goals came from crosses. Obviously, the third one was from a set piece, which we've been poor at anyway. Is it something that you envisage now, every team looking at Fulham and saying, oh, okay, that's the way to do it? And if so, is there any chance at all that Ange will change for it, or will he stick to his kind of default setting of this is what we do, we just got to do it better?
Well, I think I think because the way Fulham did it, it felt all still felt quite narrow, and I think other teams have decided to go low block against us. So
Mm.
I think it will just depend whether teams feel like they've got what it takes. I can imagine Liverpool will look at that, City will look at that, Arsenal will definitely look at that, and they'll go, right, okay, they've got the tools here to actually hurt us. So we might need to be a bit more reactive against those teams. We may even need to revert back to the double pivot for those teams, just to add a bit more protection. I could see Højbjerg maybe coming in for some of those bigger games just to give us a little bit more in there. But that doesn't necessarily mean, if anything, that actually means in some of those games that we'll have the opportunity to maybe sit slightly deeper and then break a bit more. Um, but yeah, I think it showed how the Premier League is just one of these fascinating places where teams lower down the league have the quality these days to actually punish some of the top teams when they're not quite at their best.
Yeah, and there's certainly been, I'm going to talk about this a bit more later on in the episode, but there's certainly been a quite a strong reaction from, what I would describe as the Twitter corner of the Spurs fan base about Ange's, previous lack of management in what would be described as a top tier league. Do you feel that that has any sway? Do you think there's any truth to that he's suffering for the first time? Because as you mentioned, the Premier League's lesser teams are able to do numbers on us like that?
Well, you could tell by his reaction that he's very much, it's all about the process at the minute. And I think if you remember the early days of Poch, he was a very similar guy where he wouldn't really mind if the team lost because it was about, what the building the philosophy within the players. I think what will disappoint him is that the passing was off, the effort was off. And that's not to say we didn't have good patches in the match because we did. I thought there were periods of time between like the 20th minute and probably right up until the first goal. I thought we had actually
Yeah.
regained some control over the match. And then again, once the substitutions were made, they showed so much more energy. You could just see it in their legs. They were like fighting. So yeah, he'll just be annoyed that we've not maintained that level throughout the match and allowed a team to kind of bully us a little bit in areas of the pitch which were so important in terms of swaying the game.
Yeah. Uh, Talking again about these kind of fans who are getting particularly angry, there's like an element of hysteria to it. A lot of
That's
them are,
football, though.
well, of course it is, and it's social media football especially. But a lot of them are saying, "Oh, here we go again. I can't wait for another project." You know, we went from Poch's project to Mourinho's project to Nuno's project to Conte's project. And my kind of answer to that, and actually I'm going to do a video about it later this week where I kind of go into some of these people's tweets and kind of give my kind of subjective feeling on why I disagree. But I don't really know what these people expect. I mean, if they're expecting a manager to go into a club like Spurs and suddenly, you know, change them around from being a club who haven't won a trophy since 2008 to suddenly winning everything the first season, all you have to do is look at the other clubs and how they've built and realize that that's just not possible. Because, yes, of course, and this is something I would say, you know, maybe you could give a little bit of stick for to Daniel Levy for not forward thinking enough. But yes, he is kind of flip-flapped from, you know, one style of manager to another to another. He's always kind of bouncing off what hasn't worked last. So for me, for someone to say, "Oh, I'm not ready to wait for another project," just seems kind of naive. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's totally naive, and it's also one game. We're still in a good position, even if your goals aren't the same as Ange. We're still in a great position to qualify for Europe. A lot of people just wanted to qualify for Europa League this year. That's looking like a very strong prospect.
At least.
Um, at least, yeah. So I think everyone needs to calm down basically and realize it's one game. The players are obviously unhappy with their levels, and I think possibly criticisms could be made of Ange, but you have to trust him in the long term that he's still finding out a lot about his players. I mean, possibly you'd make different team selections based on today, but he'll learn from that in the future. He'll know more about some of these players in certain types of games.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Ange, when he came in, he said, you know, this is about changing the mentality. This is about building this club up to a place where we can challenge. And I do think there's a chance. I don't know how you feel about it, but I think there's a chance that this season is very much about this is how to play, whether we're, you know, remember that Chelsea game? Even when you're down to 9 men and you've lost players injured, we're still going to play this way. And he's drilling it in so that then potentially when he has got his squad that he trusts completely and he has drilled it in, you know, so it's 100% the way they play in any situation, then maybe he'd be willing to evolve a little bit more with situations. Maybe not have both fullbacks piling forward at the same time and bring one of them back, akin to what Klopp and Pep have done in terms of their evolution as managers. I mean, I feel that way, but do you think that's the same, or do you think Ange is just this number one stubborn coach who will never change whatever?
I don't. I mean, he's already shown that he's slightly adaptable within the system with in terms of the double pivot. In terms of the space up the wings, I mean, that was a problem under Conte as well. I think if you're going to be an attacking team, look at Manchester City. Like they pretty much play with Kyle Walker. You know, when he was, in that right back position, he's always exposed, but he's got the pace to come back. So
Sure.
that's the difference. And if you look at Klopp, I think Klopp, going back to what we were saying before as well, everyone needs to look at what Klopp's first couple of seasons looked like with Liverpool. That's the kind of progression that we need to be seeing. If after 2 years we're still getting exposed and we still haven't got the squad, then I think fair enough. There's reasons to criticise Ange, but it's way too early for this. I think we're overachieving
We are.
so far from what we wanted at the start of the season, and I'm sure we'll bounce back after this game. I'm sure we will, at least levels wise. We
Yeah.
might not beat the top teams, but I think we'll bounce back.
Well, I think we'll bounce back and we'll beat some of those top teams, but maybe I'm being a little bit too glass half full there. I also, one thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, it's almost as if some fans and some people forget that the football, and particularly Premier League football, top level football, is a game about, it's about a moment. It's about moments. And we had those moments in the first half. The Son miss that just went over the bar and the Madison miss that just went left of the post. One of those goes in or they both go in, it's a completely different game. The game changes 100%.
Yeah,
And we're coming away from that game being like, oh, it's another amazing performance by Spurs. The reality of us, I think, talking, and I agree with you that I think there did seem to be a little bit of a lack of desire, or maybe a few percentage points off from our players that day. But I would also argue potentially that that's because, oh, their chances missed and Fulham's chances took their chances. They were more clinical. And it's easy to forget about that when you've been, you know, battered 3-0 in a game that you think you're going to win. But those little moments are absolutely vital.
Yeah, I mean, I rewatched the game last night, well, at least the first half, because that was the one where I was probably most distracted by my roast dinner. Um, and
Good decision.
at the end of the end of the game, the stats are pretty even, but we had most of the possession as I remember it.
Hmm.
I think we had maybe 57%. So it wasn't like we got battered in every department, but I just think where it mattered, we did. And those chances in the first half were pretty clear. And in the second half, Richie had two good ones. I think there
Werner,
was another one
obviously.
as well. Yeah.
Werner.
Yeah. That was. I'm hoping he was offside, but
He
maybe
wasn't.
he
So
wasn't.
he wasn't offside. But I've watched it back. The one thing I will say for him is that the goalkeeper dives across to try and get it, and I think wrongly Werner is expecting that the Werner's going to that the keeper's going to get a touch on it, and so he's trying to ready his body for will the ball move a little bit,
Deflect or
and
something.
actually
Yeah.
it didn't. And in the end, I mean, there's no excuse for it. It's a bad miss. And you know damn well that Harry Kane or even Brennan Johnson is probably gonna, just be more. I think he just kind of waved his leg at it rather than being kind of more like this is my goal kind of thing. But again,
Yeah.
that's again, I had to talk to, I do this watch along on We Are Tottenham TV, and I had to do a call in show afterwards. And some of the abuse Werner was getting was just like, it's as if he tried to miss it. And it's like, come on, mate, that's just not the facts. And he's obviously he's a workhorse, and he wants to do well for the club. And he's got limited confidence in front of goal. But yes, as you were saying, yeah, we did make chances.
Yeah, and I think the subs actually were a bright thing. If there's a positive to take out of it, I thought that's the best that Bentancur's looked for a while. I thought
Mhm.
he had a zest and an energy and a control that I've not seen for a few weeks from him. So I don't know. I don't think we should panic, but it wasn't good enough. And yeah, we missed the big moments in the match, and that is you're absolutely right. I think that's what these games come down to, especially when teams like Fulham have got quality. I mean, I thought Iwobi was class. Their
Ugh,
left back was it Robinson? He was very
yeah,
good.
really like
And obviously
Robinson.
the Brazilians, I'd take either of them in the side. I mean,
Well, Palhinha, I think is
um,
Palhinha Brazilian or is he Portuguese?
oh, he's
I think he's
Portuguese. Yeah,
Portuguese. Yeah,
sorry.
but yeah, I think I think maybe I texted you after the game and said I would definitely take Robinson, and I'd be interested to see whether we're in for a proper number six in the summer, because Basuma has just dropped off a little bit, and he was outclassed at the weekend.
Yeah, I think Basuma. I've been thinking about this a lot. He stopped taking as many risks in terms of being on the half turn, receiving the ball, and early in the season he was beating the press. Where
Hmm.
a couple of players have come to him, but then I think maybe there was one match early in the season after his first suspension where he got exposed.
He
Maybe
did,
it's a
yeah.
long time ago, and I think maybe psychologically he's not making those risky turns as much anymore, which is a bit of a shame. I understand why. Another thing about him that frustrates me a bit is that he's not very good, seemingly running back towards goal, picking up markers.
Hmm.
Sorry, picking up runners.
Hmm.
He doesn't seem to have a game awareness in those positions, which, and maybe I'm being harsh on him, but there's been a couple of times him and Saar were a bit lackadaisical on the
Hmm.
third goal. They were sort of just stood there watching when, someone could have been challenging there. That was a bit disappointing, but again, maybe there was just too much pressure on him, and he needed a bit more help in there.
Yeah,
But he's a great player though, so
I
it's
think
not time to throw him away yet.
no, I agree. I think he is a great player, and there's some kind of discourse as to whether he is more of an eight than a six. The only thing I'd say is, and I agree with you, I do love how good he is at being able to take it on the half turn, but I do think he's got a little bit more conservative and pragmatic in recent months. But when you look at the best sixes in the league, and I'd say Palhinha and I'd say Rodri at Man City. Not
Mm,
only can they take it on the half turn and they're brave, but they're also big old units who aren't afraid to kind of make those professional fouls and get in those scraps a little bit. And maybe that's
yeah,
where Basuma doesn't give us enough there, because with so many players bombing forward in front of him, we need that player to really kind of take some tackles, make some tackles for the team when it comes back on the transition. And that's why I wonder whether we'll be in the hunt for Palhinha in the summer.
Yeah, was he meant to go to City at one point? I can't
Palini
remember.
was going to go to Bayern Munich last summer, and then it
Ah,
just didn't
okay.
quite happen on the last day of the
Well,
window.
I would take him all day long. I think he's amazing.
Yeah, he's really
And he
good.
we it mean he wouldn't have to move house as well, so that's
Yes,
good.
which we're always far more interested in their home lives. Another thing that I've seen kind of some Spurs fans complaining about is Ange not ranting and raving enough on the touchlines, on the touchline, sorry. My personal opinion on that is, he has been in management for 30 years and has realized that actually that doesn't really do a great deal, and he prefers to kind of do everything in the changing room. Is that something you've noticed or you care about?
Um, I think the team know how they want to play, so I imagine that's his thought process. But also, I do worry about how strong his vocal cords are as a musician. After the game, I'm not sure his voice could take it if he was yelling. I know what you mean, though, but
So
I
true.
guess it depends if they're not following the instructions or not. But I get the feeling they are, but maybe they just weren't hitting the levels on Saturday. But yeah, I know a bit people like passion, but yeah, he's probably a bit long in the tooth for all of that.
I think you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because
Yeah.
it's all dependent on how well your team is doing. Because if your like manager is ranting and raving and you're winning, like say Klopp does, he's amazing, he's the best manager of all time. But trust me, if Klopp was on a 10-game losing streak, they'd all be looking at him like, oh, you've lost it, mate, you're a dinosaur. Just one thing more thing I wanted to talk about. Obviously, Radu Dragishin made his first start. I listened to the View from the Lane podcast last night, and it was Charlie Eccleshare or Jack Pitt-Brooks said they felt that he was caught out for at least two of the goals, maybe three. Now, I personally don't agree. I think that first goal where the cross came across from Robinson, perfectly bent cross and a brilliant one-touch and finish. I think he is keeping the line that he's been asked to keep with his fellow defenders there, and actually it's just a beautiful cross. How did you feel he played, and do you think he was responsible for any of those goals?
Yeah, I think probably the you could criticize possibly him, but not as much as the other players for failing to react for the third goal. He tried his best, I think, but maybe in other situations he might have got there first and anticipated it. I think that first goal, I would say, I would blame him slightly. I would also blame Destiny for not reading what was happening, and he just kind of watched that whole thing unfold. He's got the pace to help Dragic in there, but I do think he was possibly slightly out of position. Just took his eye off him, in a key moment. But at the end of the day, that was like I don't know, like 19 times out of 20, that ball doesn't make it. That
Is
was
that
a
are you
that
talking
was a
about
bit of
are you talking about the second goal where it comes off the guy's knee that comes from the
Oh
left?
no, the first goal, I think
Oh, okay.
19 times out of 20, that ball that Robinson played in,
Oh
it was
yeah.
just a bit of a worldy
It
pass.
was, yeah.
Um, and I think he would have gotten away with that in most other situations. He was just slightly out of
He
position,
was
I
maybe a
think.
yard off him. He was maybe a yard off him,
Yeah,
but I don't know.
it's harsh. It's harsh.
Yeah, I said it at the weekend. I feel like it's one of those. I mean, my issue is actually, and I've said this a lot. I probably even said it in our chat last week. I think Spurs are terrible at stopping the cross at source. All season we've been
Mm.
terrible at it. It's almost like they're goading the player to be like, can you put this? Are you good enough to put this in the perfect position? And actually, more times than we would expect or want, it does happen. And Robinson's cross was a perfect example of that. The second goal was. Again, you've got to stop the cross at source, and we don't, and therefore, and then it comes across, and it's a lucky finish off his knee. But all season, even giving away deep free kicks and stuff like that, we are not good enough at stopping the cross, and we've conceded far too many goals. And then the third one is another set piece. And again, I think I said this to you last week, but I don't think it looks good on Ange. This is the one thing where I'd say it doesn't look good on him, that he's like, no, I don't agree, I don't believe in specific set piece coaches. Well, that's one thing if you're not conceding from set pieces. But if every other club has set piece coaches and they're doing better than you, then it looks a little bit old fashioned.
Yeah, it does. I do get the logic in some ways, but proof's in the pudding, isn't it? So if it doesn't get any better, then you're gonna have to start criticising either the coaches themselves. I know. So is it Jedinak takes the
It's Mason doing
defensive?
the attacking ones and Jedinak doing the defensive ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. It's on them.
um,
I mean, I mentioned View from the Lane. Make sure you subscribe to that if you don't already. It's a brilliant podcast. But also the Extra Inch, which I also listen to. They've been talking a lot about how Jedinak seems to have changed the defensive set piece or the defensive corner routine in the last couple of games. And in both of those games, there's been a huge gap at the back post. And in this instance, obviously, that led to that goal kind of where, from the second header where Romero drops in. Look, you've just got to back the fact that they are, of course, analysing everything and they'll be trying to improve, and it's their first year as well. But we've got to be better in general at stopping crosses, and we've got to be better at getting our first head on corners and crosses. And actually, what I'd say for Dragusin is I thought in the first half, he really did brilliantly a few times winning the first header at corners, which we haven't been great at. So I want to give him some credit for that.
yeah, I thought he was great in the air, and that's obviously a massive attribute of his. And there's room for improvement. It's his first start. I don't think it's time to.
Of course.
We need to get behind the players, and if anything, I don't think you can blame him for all the goals in total. But it's kind of good that he might get some mistakes out of his system, and the next time he gets a start, hopefully he'll improve.
Yeah, and actually, I think potentially he is more, for me, a backup for Romero as the right-sided centre half than Van der Ven as the left, because you notice he's not massively comfortable on his left. He played the ball out of touch, out into touch a few times, trying to play a left-footed ball into Johnson. Whereas on his right, I think he'll be a lot more comfortable. Okay, before we finish, Joe, I just want to ask, do you think going forward for the last 10 games of the season, this result will be beneficial for us for the rest of the season in terms of us being, and Ange being able to say to them, look, you've had your game where you were off it a couple of percent, got to be on it 100% now to go on a run?
Yeah, I think levels will be a reminder to every game. I know it's such a cliche, but every game will be a cup final from now on. But I also wonder whether the fact that we haven't reacted in game will make the players and the coaching staff do a bit more analytical work about in game management, and maybe how to the moments don't change the way we play, but maybe find moments where the whole team maybe drops in a bit more, continue to play out from the back, but to allow us to soak up a bit more pressure and then hit teams from a further back position. And also, I mean, I think I said it last time I was on, that the Fulham pitch was the smallest pitch in the Premier League. And there wasn't really the space for us to stretch the play. But I feel if we drop it a bit more, maybe there's going to be the opportunity to do that when teams are really coming at us. But we'll see. But yeah, we've got to stay positive and hopefully we can beat the Arsenal at least, and then that's our cup final done with.
During that season. Yeah. Brilliant. Joe, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, if you want to check out Joe's music, and trust me, you do, all the information is in the description box below. He's in a band called The Traveling Band and has his own solo project called Later Youth. Check it out. It's really brilliant. Also, thank you so much for watching and listening. Please do press the like if you're watching on YouTube and the subscribe button. And if you're on YouTube, go over to the podcast platforms. Just type in the Spurred On podcast to the search engine on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you are, and give us a subscribe or follow. It's really helpful. And finally, you can be a Spurred On Pro or Patreon member. It's only £1 a month. All the information in the description box. But with a difficult international week of boredom coming up, try to stay positive, as Joe says. Let's not get too down, and come on, you Spurs.